All right, today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a pretty intense book. It's called Infidel, and it's the memoir from Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And basically what she does is she takes us through her journey, her pretty incredible journey from a childhood that was just completely steeped in traditional Islam to becoming one of the most well-known critics of the religion.
Yeah, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I mean, what a figure. You know, she's a former Muslim, she's a feminist. She really advocates strongly for women's rights, particularly within Islam. And because of that, she's someone who has gotten a ton of praise and like really fierce criticism for her views. So Infidel, I think, really gives us a good look into how she developed those views and kind of the evolution of her thinking. And I think the best place to start is really at the beginning with her early life, growing up in Somalia.
Yeah, I mean, her childhood, I don't even know where to begin. It was so different from anything that I've ever experienced. You know, she was born into this nomadic clan and they were in Somalia.
Mm.
And it was a society where everything was really dictated by your lineage and tradition. You know, her grandmother would tell her all these folk tales. They had all these warnings and lessons about the dangers women face. And they really stuck with her.
Yeah, and it's interesting because those stories weren't just entertainment for kids. They were really like a main way of passing down these important cultural values and like really highlighting, you know, the position of women in Somali society, which was precarious to say the least. And one thing that really comes up a lot is this concept of bari.
Sorry, yeah.
It's kind of hard to translate directly, but it's this emphasis on stoicism and duty for Somali women. It's like this expectation to endure hardship, to endure suffering, but do it without complaint. You know, imagine being like a young girl and having that expectation put upon you.
Yeah, and I feel like that expectation of Bari becomes even more important when we consider, Hirsi Ali and how she ends up rebelling against those societal and religious norms. You know, it's almost like she was pushing back against this thing that had been ingrained in her, this idea of just suffering silently.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And speaking of rebelling, her life takes this huge turn when her dad, who is a political dissident, ends up in prison and her family has to flee Somalia and they end up in Saudi Arabia.
Which, I mean, what a culture shock. You're going from these wide open landscapes of Somalia to Saudi Arabia, which is so rigid and governed by religious law.
Yeah, and suddenly, you know, Hirsi Ali is in this world where there's strict Islamic law everywhere and this constant focus on sin, you know, and what is considered to be sin and the idea of punishment for that sin, you know, and her childhood innocence, it kind of clashes with these much stricter interpretations of Islam that she suddenly is faced with.
Yeah, and there's actually this one part that she talks about in the book where she got in trouble because she was clapping while she was playing in the Grand Mosque.
Oh, wow.
Such a small thing.
Yeah.
But it was seen as this big offense. It was offensive to the space.
Yeah, you know, and you can imagine, right, that experience in Saudi Arabia, I mean, it had to have left a mark on her. And I think it sort of introduced her to this, you know, really, really strict version of Islam and sort of planted these seeds of doubt in her mind that later developed into, you know, pretty outright criticism of certain aspects of the religion. But that wasn't her only experience, you know, with different interpretations of Islam.
Right, because then the family moves again, and this time they go to Kenya.
Yeah.
And in Kenya, she's exposed to a much more liberal version of Islam through her father, actually.
Yeah, and it's her dad, you know, who's encouraging her to be curious, to ask questions, and even, you know, to question some of the religious doctrines and being exposed to these different viewpoints, like these contrasting ideas. I think it had to have had a profound impact on her. You know, it probably made her more willing to question beliefs and figure things out for herself.
Yeah, so we're starting to see how all these different interpretations of Islam are really shading the way she's seen the world.
Exactly. And then as she's getting older, you know, she's becoming a teenager in Kenya, this internal struggle, it becomes even stronger, right? You know, she's trying to reconcile her intellect and her desire to be independent with these increasingly conservative Islamic teachings that are all around her.
And around the same time, we see this rise of Islamic fundamentalism that starts to like really take hold in her community. And there's this preacher, Bokal Sam, and he was known for these really intense sermons where he advocated for this like super strict like puritanical version of Islam. And his message, it was starting to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, and his teachings represented this pretty big shift towards a more fundamentalist way of thinking about Islam. And what he was saying, you know, he would say it with such certainty that it resonated with people, but it also created a lot of tension, even within families, as people tried to figure out how to reconcile these stricter interpretations with what they already believed.
Yeah, and then on top of all of that, you have the backdrop of the Somali civil war.
Right.
I mean, the entire country is being torn apart by clan warfare. It's just this added layer of instability and violence that she's experiencing.
Yeah, and when the civil war breaks out, her family, they become refugees again. And it really emphasizes how brutal these clan conflicts were in Somalia. Imagine just living with this constant fear, this threat of violence, and possibly having to flee your home again. It's just this very stark reminder of how fragile peace can be and how deep these divisions were within her own country.
And it's during this time, the middle of war and this rise of fundamentalism, that Hirsi Ali makes this huge decision. She decides to flee an arranged marriage and seek asylum in Europe.
I mean, that was incredibly brave to go against what society expected of her and just forge her own path. I mean, it was like she was rejecting the life that had been laid out for her and just taking this leap into the unknown.
Yeah, and her escape to the Netherlands, I think it's a turning point in her life. She leaves her family, her culture, everything she knew, and it sets her on this path to becoming, one of the most well-known critics of Islam in the West.
Her story is really about this desire we all have for freedom, right? And just the incredible lengths that people will go to find that freedom. It makes us think about what we believe, and confront the challenges that people face when they dare to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, and I think at its core, it's a story of resilience, of rebellion, and this search for who you are, for your own identity in a world that's often defined by tradition and dogma.
Getting to the Netherlands, it had a profound effect on Hirsi Ali. I mean, she was just floored by how orderly things were and the freedom she had in Dutch society, especially compared to the chaos and the restrictions she knew from before.
Yeah, she describes this one walk in the book, and she's like going through the streets of Düsseldorf, and she's like blown away by how clean everything is, and this feeling of individual liberty that she could just like sense. It was a totally different world from what she'd known.
And I think that contrast between the societies, that's a big thing in the book. She's always comparing the stability and the fact that the Netherlands is so prosperous with what was happening in Somalia and the social constraints that she felt in Saudi Arabia.
But even though she's like embracing this new freedom, she's also like wrestling with this guilt and uncertainty, leaving her family, her culture, and her faith behind. That was like a really big deal for her.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind that her transformation, it wasn't like this sudden thing. It was gradual, and she definitely had this internal conflict going on the whole time. She was drawn to Western values, but she still had this past that she was carrying with her.
And as she's like settling into this new life, she really starts to question, like really question traditional Islam and whether it's valid. And she takes this job as a translator, and she's working with Somali refugees, and that experience really, really made her more disillusioned with the religion.
Yeah, being a translator, it gave her this inside look into the lives of these other refugees. She's hearing all these stories of hardship and the struggles that they're facing, but she's also seeing what she considered to be this darker side of her own culture.
Yeah, she was seeing domestic violence, women being oppressed, and just this, what she perceived as this blind adherence to religious doctrines that she felt like were causing people to suffer. And those experiences, they were really big turning points for her.
It was like she started to make this connection between certain Islamic teachings and the suffering she was seeing, especially the suffering of women. And that realization, it led her right to political activism.
And she really became this vocal critic of Islam, and particularly the way that women are treated in Islam. And of course, this outspokenness, it caused a lot of controversy.
Oh yeah, people accused her of betraying her faith, her culture, of fueling Islamophobia. But she always said that she was criticizing the ideology, not Muslims themselves. She wanted to point out what she felt were these harmful practices.
And that brings us to her collaboration with Theo Van Gogh, the filmmaker. And they got together and made this short film called Submission, and it used some really powerful imagery to depict uh, what they saw as the mistreatment of women in Islam.
And submission, it was meant to provoke.
Yeah.
They wanted to get people talking and challenge what they saw as this blind acceptance of practices that they felt were harmful.
And the film, it caused this huge uproar.
Oh.
It was so controversial,
Hmm.
and tragically, not long after it was released, Van Gogh was assassinated by an Islamic extremist.
Yeah, Van Gogh's murder, it was this horrifying act of violence. It shook the Netherlands to its core.
Yeah.
And it really showed how divided Dutch society was and this very real threat of extremist ideology.
And for Hirsi Ali, it was just devastating to lose him. But it also made her more determined than ever to keep speaking out, even though she knew it was dangerous.
Yeah, after the assassination attempt, she was forced into exile and was living with this constant threat. It was a very, very stark reminder of what she was risking by doing
I mean,
this.
she lost her home, she lost her sense of security, and she even ended up losing her Dutch citizenship. She paid a really high price for sticking to her principles.
Yeah, and her exile, it's this whole new chapter in her life. She keeps writing, she keeps speaking out against Islamic extremism, and she becomes this internationally recognized figure, but she's still very polarizing.
Right. Her story really shows that fighting for freedom, it often comes with a really high personal cost. And towards the end of Infidel, you get this sense of both defiance and reflection.
Yeah, she doesn't back down at all from the controversy that she caused or her criticism of certain parts of Islam. But she also admits that these are really complicated issues.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answers.
Yeah, and she really challenges Western societies to figure out how to integrate Muslim immigrants while still upholding their own values. And she really emphasizes the importance of individual liberty and critical thinking.
Yeah, and it's a call to action that I think is still relevant today, right? We're still trying to figure out how to deal with multiculturalism and religious freedom in a world that's so globalized. And Infidel, the book, it's gotten a lot of praise, but it's also gotten a lot of condemnation.
People who like it, they say that she's courageous and that they admire her willingness to go against the grain and challenge what everyone thinks. They see her as someone who's standing up for individual liberty. But then there are the people who really criticize her and they accuse her of Islamophobia.
Right, and they say that she's too general in her criticism,
Mhm.
that she doesn't represent the diversity of beliefs and practices that are actually within Islam.
Yeah.
It's definitely a complex and sensitive topic, and there are no easy answers. But no matter what side you land on, I think Infidel, it started some really important conversation. It makes us think about some pretty uncomfortable truths about Islam, about culture, and about how tradition and modernity clash.
Yeah, and reading it, it's challenging. It's not an easy book to read, but it is rewarding.
Yeah.
It gives you this really unique look at a religion that I think is often misunderstood. And it brings up these really important questions about women's rights, about freedom of expression, and how tolerant we can really be in a multicultural society.
It's a powerful book. It makes you think. It makes you confront some uncomfortable stuff.
Mhm.
It's a story about resilience, about rebellion, and about trying to figure out who you are in a world that's trying to tell you who you should be. A world where faith and tradition and modernity, they're all kind of like bumping into each other.
Yeah, it's one of those books that sticks with you. You finish it, but you're still thinking about it, and it makes you want to talk to other people about it. Like
Yeah.
really talk about the challenges that we're facing in the world.
Definitely. And I think in the end, Infidel shows just how powerful one person's voice can be, how one person can challenge what everyone else thinks and start a conversation that goes way beyond their own community. It's a story that shows us how important it is to think for ourselves, to be able to say what we think, and to search for freedom in a world that often tries to keep us in a box.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a book that's gonna like shake up the way you think about things and make you really think hard, you should definitely check out Infidel. It'll leave you with more questions than answers, but I think that's what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely. You know, it might even get you thinking about your own beliefs and how culture affects us and how we can find freedom in a world that likes to set boundaries.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
You know, we really hope that you'll pick up the book yourself and decide what you think about it. It's a really strong book. It'll stay with you.